Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. 2 million more economic impact payments disbursed under the American Rescue Plan. Total reaches approximately 161 million as payments continue. IR 2021-92, April 22nd, 2021, Washington. Today, the Internal Revenue Service, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and the Bureau of the Fiscal Service announced they are disbursing nearly 2 million payments in the sixth batch of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan. So they've been issuing these in batches now. They're on the sixth batch of the economic impact payments. We're talking round 3, EIP 3 at this point, as opposed to EIP 1 and EIP 2. Today's announcement brings the total disbursed so far to approximately 161 million payments, with a total value of more than $379 billion since these payments began rolling out to Americans in batches as announced on March 12th. If you want to look at more of that, there's a link to that here. The sixth batch of payments begin processing on Friday, April 16th, with an official payment date of April 21st, with some people receiving direct payments in their accounts earlier as provisional or pending deposits. So if you haven't yet received your economic impact payment, this might be it here, round 6 or batch 6 as they call it, going out. So here is additional information on this batch of payments. So here's what they have regarding this batch of payments, see if it applies to you. So in total, this batch includes nearly 2 million payments with a value of nearly $3.4 billion, nearly 700,000 payments with a value of more than $1.3 billion went to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue an economic impact payment, but who recently filed a tax return. So that's good. It might be that their efforts to try to reach people who they don't have their information has been paying off, apparently, because they're sending more checks out to those individuals. Those are people that didn't file a tax return. The IRS doesn't have any information on them, so they couldn't send out the payment, and they don't have any other kind of issue or any other kind of payment plan from some other federal agency, such as Social Security, that the IRS can kind of rely on in order to issue the payment. If you're in that situation, you got to file the tax return. Filing the tax return, giving the IRS the information so that they can then process the payment based on that information. Remember, if you're in that situation, that when you file the tax return, to get round 1 and round 2, if you haven't got round 1 and round 2, those will actually be on the tax return in the form of the recovery rebate credit. So you'll actually, that'll be part of what will be calculated as, quote, the refund, end quote, which is really not kind of a refund if there were no taxes paid, but it would be calculated on the tax return. The round 3 economic impact payment is reliant on the 2020 tax return to be filed. If it had not been filed, otherwise they would have relied on 2019. But if they don't have the information, they'll rely on 2020, but the information won't be on 2020. In other words, you will not calculate the economic impact payment 3 on 2020 tax return. The IRS will use the 2020 tax return to give the prepayment of the 2021, assuming recovery rebate credit, which is the third economic impact payment. So it looks like they have been, sending out more money to that group of people. So people have been filing a tax return and giving the IRS more information. So the IRS has more information about everybody and everything. So this batch also includes additional ongoing supplemental payments for people who earlier this year received payments based on their 2019 tax return, but are eligible for a new or larger payment based on their recently processed 2020 tax returns. This batch includes nearly 700,000 of these, quote, plus up, end quote, payments with a value of nearly $1.2 billion. So this is the other kind of predictable situation that happened here. They sent out the third round of economic impact payments, and before basically 2020 tax returns were required to be filed, then they extended the filing deadline for 2020 tax returns, which means that this prepayment that's going out, the economic impact payment, needed to be based on something. They couldn't base it on 2020 for most people because it had not yet been filed. Therefore, they based it on 2019. However, the income limitation is lower here. So there's an income limitation as to whether you get the amount or not. And it's quite possible that many people had a higher income in 2019 than in 2020 because that's when the whole problem happened. And therefore, it's possible that if they relied on 2019, you wouldn't have got the economic impact payment for the round 3. But if you filed 2020, then you would have got it possibly if your income was lower. So that means that they had to give this plus up payment to people that filed 2020. So once again, if you're in that situation, if your 2019 was higher than the point to get any economic impact payment, your AGI, your adjusted gross income, was too high to get the payment, but your income in 2020 went way down, then you need to file the 2020 tax return. Once again, when you do that, with regard to the third payment, there's nothing on the tax return related to the third payment. But once you file, the IRS should automatically use that as the prepayment to give you this plus up payment. That's different than the first two, round 1 and round 2, which if they weren't done properly, you do need to actually calculate on the tax return. So 2020 is the remedy for all 3 payments at this point in time, but the remedy is different for round 1, round 2, and round 3. Round 1 and round 2, remedy is the recovery rebate credit actually calculated on the tax return. Remedy for round 3 is to file the tax return, giving the IRS your information, including your income information. And if that is lower than your 2019 information, you may get a quote plus up payment, end quote, plus up, end quote, payment from the IRS. So another 600,000 payments went to Social Security beneficiaries and supplemental security income recipients, including those with foreign addresses. Overall, this 6th batch of payments contains about 900,000 direct deposit payments with a total value of $1.5 billion and nearly 1.1 million paper check payments with a total value of nearly $1.8 billion. Additional information is available on the first 5 batches of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan, which began processing on April 9th, April 2nd, March 26th, March 19th, and March 12th. So if you want to look more into any of those batches that went out, you can do so here. It's good times. So the IRS will continue to make economic impact payments on a weekly basis. Ongoing payments will be sent to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue a payment, but who recently filed a tax return, as well to people who qualify for the quote plus up, end quote, payments. Special reminders for those who don't normally file a tax return. Although payments are automatic for most people, the IRS continues to urge people who don't normally file a tax return and haven't received an economic impact payments to file a 2020 tax return to get all the benefits they're entitled to under the law, including tax credits such as the 2020 Recovery Rebate Credit, the Child Tax Credit, and the Earned Income Tax Credit. So if you haven't got any of the economic impact payments because you don't file the taxes, then you could pick up, all of them. The remedy for all of them is to file basically the 2020 tax return. And it's getting to be kind of significant here in terms of the dollar amount. We're on round 3 here on the economic impact payments. So if you haven't filed it or something like that, I'm sure there's a lot of scams going out, related to these things as well. So just, be aware of it. I think it's best to file the tax return, be on top of the payments, and get the money, and then do whatever you want to do with it. So filing a 2020 tax return will also assist the IRS in determining whether someone is eligible for an advance payment of the 2021 Child Tax Credit, which will begin to be disbursed this summer. So we're continuing on with these kind of advance payment types of things. It looks like they're here going to have an advance payment of the Child Tax Credit. Now, that's another credit that's one of these kind of refundable tax credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, meaning it could take your taxable income below 0 and still kind of get a refund for it. And therefore, it might make it a little bit easier to do one of these refundable or prepayment, advance payment type of situations where they can take the information from the prior return, send out the prepayment, and then you get the money sooner, and then it should tie out or match out when you file the tax return. This concept, it's doable. It is a little confusing. I'm sure this is kind of confusing people to some degree with these prepayments of the economic impact payments and a lot of the stuff to try to get the money out sooner. But the attempt here is to get the money out sooner And that's the plan here. So pros and cons of it. In any case, for example, some federal benefits recipients may need to file a 2020 tax return even if they don't usually file to provide information the IRS needs to send payments for a qualifying dependent. Eligible individuals in this group should file a 2020 tax return as quickly as possible to be considered for an additional payment for the qualifying dependents. So that's another situation. Probably a lot of people out there, if they got the payment based on like Social Security payments or other kind of federal payments, the IRS would not know about then any dependent information. The dependents would also qualify for a payment. So if you were to file a tax return and tell them you have dependents, then it's possible that you can get the third economic impact payments, which would be applicable in round 1 and round 2, possible as well, although the rules are different for round 1 and round 2 with regards to dependents. There's some limitations. In the round 1, there was a dollar amount difference between dependents. So that could be different. Be aware of that. In any case, people who don't normally file a tax return and don't receive federal benefits may qualify for these economic impact payments. This includes those experiencing homelessness, the rural poor, and others. Individuals who didn't get a first or second round economic impact payment or got less than the full amounts may be eligible for their 2020 recovery rebate credit. There's a link to that here, but they'll need to file a 2020 tax return. So see the special section of the IRS.gov claiming the 2020 recovery rebate credit. If you aren't required to file a tax return, there's a link to that here. Free tax return preparation is available for qualifying people. There's a link to that here as well. The IRS reminds taxpayers that the income levels in this new round of economic impact payments have changed. This means that people won't be eligible for the third payment even if they received a first or second economic impact payment or claimed a 2020 recovery rebate credit. Payments will begin to be reduced for individuals making $75,000 or above in adjusted gross income. So if you're not married, the typical general rule, $75,000 or above, it starts to phase out. The credit then goes down, in other words. After that point, it goes down sharply. If you're married filing joint, it's $150,000 that it starts going down at. The payments end at $80,000, so above $80,000, no more economic impact payments for non-married people generally, and $160,000 for married filing jointly. People with adjusted gross income above these levels are ineligible for a payment. Individuals can check the Get My Payment tool. There's a link to that here on irs.gov, irs.gov, the IRS website, to see the payment status of these payments. Additional information on economic impact payments is available on irs.gov. There's a link to that here as well, and there'll be a link to this in the description.